So welcome, Maria Del Mar Morales Burkle.
Thank you.
Maria, your title is Expert on Climate Risks and Opportunity at the company South Pole, and the company that company develops and implements comprehensive emission reduction projects and strategies. So, can you tell us about your background and your current responsibilities?
Yes, of course. So I have quite a mixed background, I would say. I started with policy evaluation, worked several years in that. And then I studied a master's in disaster risk management and climate change adaptation, which took me to this sustainability world. And with South Pole, I've been working with GHG accounting, but then also very much so with climate risks and opportunities analysis, resilience building with companies. And I've been working with several sectors: food, agriculture, consumer staples, industrials, energy.
And also on a more personal level then, if you could have a superpower to help you in your sustainability mission, what would that be?
Yeah, I think it would be the power to change minds, in an ethical way, of course. But just to convince people that this is, it's worth it to change our lifestyles and to change our business models towards sustainability.
Thank you very much, Maria.
Thank you.
The stage is yours.
Thank you. Yes, hi everyone, thanks for being here. So I will be talking about the business case for analyzing your climate risks and opportunities. Yes, so to start us off with setting the scene, climate risks and opportunities are here, and they're here to stay. This is a snapshot from the World Economic Forum Global Risks Report survey, and it surveyed many people from different sectors such as businesses, but also academia, policymakers and such. And we can see how they perceive that extreme weather events, which are part of climate risks, not all climate risks, but they're the top 2 risks in the world in the short term. And this is, of course, among many other kinds of risks, such as economic risks, geopolitical risks, political risks, etc. And when we look more into the longer term, the 10 years spectrum, we see that 4 environmental risks are the 4 top risks as perceived in terms of their impact severity. So this includes the failure to adapt to climate change, the failure to mitigate climate change, natural resource shortages, etc. And these are all, of course, things that will have big impacts on our business models and our supply chains. So it's no wonder then that the double materiality perspective, very much mentioned by the CSRD, is part of what we talk about a lot in these days. So we have this impact materiality that we are speaking a lot about today. What impact do our businesses have on the environment? But then what I'm going to speak to will be more the impact that the environment can have on our businesses. And this is the financial materiality. So when we talk about climate risks and opportunities, we talk about 2 different types of risks and opportunities. We have the physical risks or climate hazards, which we're very familiar with: extreme heat, rainfall, flooding, all of these kinds of weather hazards that can impact our businesses. And we can see here how every sector is expected to be affected by these risks. Sectors with more physical value chains, with more product-based business models are said to be more affected, obviously, because they have more nature-related dependencies. But then we also have sectors with service-based value chains that will also be affected, even if to a lesser extent. And then we have the transition risks, which are these risks that we face when we want to decarbonize our economy and moving our businesses towards net zero in an economy that, of course, will start pricing carbon or has already started pricing carbon, and then will require new technologies from us. Consumers are demanding more from us. Investors are demanding more, and all these. So these are the other types of climate risks that we speak about. So here they are side by side. We have physical risks, weather events, long-term shifts in the climate, and then transition risks and opportunities, which are these policy and legal risks, market changes, technological changes, reputational changes that we face. And then, of course, as some of you have already mentioned here, we also have opportunities that come with this carbon transition, and they can have to do with resource efficiency, finding new energy sources, finding new products, new services that we can offer, getting into new markets, and of course, building business resilience. So despite how these climate risks and opportunities are more and more thought about, more and more discussed, they still remain quite underreported and under practiced, I would say. So this is a list of the 11 recommendations of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. We have on the top 3 are related to climate metrics and targets, GHG emissions, science-based targets, these kinds of things. The next 3 are about integrating climate risk into your risk management processes in your companies. The next 3 are about what are the risks and opportunities of your companies and how you build a resilience to them. And then finally, we have the governance aspect of it. So if we compare how many companies report on their climate-related metrics and targets versus how many companies report on the risks and opportunities, we can see that there's quite a difference, especially when it comes to reporting on the impact of risks and opportunities in the organization. So only 42% of companies from this study reported on this. And then if we go even further, we can see that the integration into this risk management processes for other types of risk within the company is still really lacking, and even more so the resilience of the strategy or the business model to these climate risks and opportunities. Right, so now I'll go to the main topic, the business case for understanding your climate risks and opportunities. And just as a classical business case, we have elements in two parts. We have the left-hand side, which is about reducing your costs, and then we have the right-hand side, which is about increasing your profitability. We have just divided them into 4 different themes for clarity and simplification. So starting with the first one, and this is something that has also been spoken about already, you want to manage your risks and the uncertainties of climate change. And this might sound quite obvious, but really it's not so much so, and it's part of the difficulties for companies in analyzing the risks in the future. And it's the fact that climate change defies typical financial planning horizons, right? It's not going to happen in 1 or 2 or 5 years only, but it's really going to intensify and become more severe in the next 15, 30, 50 years. So this is really something that brings a lot of uncertainty because we don't know what's going to happen in these next years. So that's why when we talk about climate risks, we look at climate scenarios, which are possible depictions of the future, very much based on the amount of emissions that we emit. So in this graph, you can see on the y-axis we have the degrees of warming in Europe in average, and then on the x-axis you have the decades. So the first blue line from 1950 to 2020 is like the baseline warming of Europe, and you can see it's already going up. And then it divides into the scenarios. And the scenario on the top, the burgundy one, would be a very much fuel-based economy, much more emissions than we have today, no policies to mitigate climate change, no effort whatsoever to limit global warming. And we can see that in this scenario, Europe reaches 7 degrees average warming by end of century. And then in the bottom, we have a net zero scenario. So a scenario where really the world economy moves towards net zero by 2050. And therefore, we limit global warming somewhat. And Europe, in this case, is projected to warm around 2.5 centigrades by end of century. And all the scenarios in the middle, they are like business as usual scenarios, or more like mid-level scenarios where we do mitigate somewhat, but not completely. So if a business wants to understand their climate risks and opportunities, we usually recommend that you look at 2 scenarios, a worst-case scenario and a best-case scenario. And this is really to stress test the strategy. So you know whether you're prepared to face the worst case or the best case or somewhere in between. So for example, a client in agriculture that will want to look at how their crops will be affected could look at a high emission scenario, and then a business as usual scenario to kind of compare how much, for example, heat waves will affect their crops. Whereas a client wanting to look into carbon pricing could look at a net zero scenario and therefore understand, if there's the worst kinds of carbon taxes in the world, how much would that affect me, or how much of that would my suppliers pass on to me in terms of costs. So the second point, and it's related to this, is reducing the costs of the transition. So when we talk about transition, we don't just mean transition to net zero, but we also mean a transition to a world that is getting warmer and to hazards that are getting stronger. So it's a transition in both ways, because we don't really, we haven't managed to mitigate what we should, and therefore the world is getting warmer and the hazards are getting stronger. So once we have understood what kind of risks we face, we really want to see what actions we can take to mitigate physical impacts, but then also to reduce the transitioning costs. And here we can look at, for example, energy savings, improving value chain resilience, etc. So in the example here, this is a crop analysis that we did for 2050, and it's a worst case scenario. As you can see, our CP 8.5 is the worst warming scenario. And we can see that the states in the south have reduced crop projections, so the yields of the crops for this client would decrease, whereas the states in the north have an increase in projections. So if our client is sourcing from the south and he gets this risk assessment, they would really want to start looking into, can we source from the north? Can we source from other countries? Can we start shifting our strategy to make it more resilient to a warming climate? And then another example from a transition perspective could be a client looking into investing in, for example, a gas plant. And through a transition risk analysis, they could understand, well, is this something that, do I risk having a stranded asset in 10, 15 years because the economy is shifting and I am just staying with fuel-based capital investments? So they might decide, maybe we should not do this capital investment, but we should go for a win-win technology, solar panels, wind turbines, whatever. So that could be one of the main benefits of understanding these risks. So the third reason has to do more with identifying opportunities for resilience and for new sources of income. So as some of you have spoken about, if businesses are on the forefront of fighting climate change or mitigating their emissions, they might really benefit from a net zero transition in the future, even though they have to invest extra somewhat now. So we can identify new markets, identify new products that will help us in this carbon transition, and that will, be a win-win, even if the world doesn't manage to get to net zero, but maybe gets into a halfway state there. So what we look into when we look into climate opportunities is really, what are the opportunities that my business faces with increasing my revenue while still moving towards net zero, so while still contributing to my mitigation goals and such. This is an example of market analysis of solar panels. So if a client, for example, sells home improvement, or it's a retailer, and they want to explore how much they could make from adding solar panels to their portfolio, they could do an analysis like this. So we look at a business as usual scenario, which is the dark blue, and then a net zero scenario, which is the blue in the top. And we can see that even if with a worst case scenario, the client could earn £6 million with this market by 2040. Of course, there's a lot of assumptions that we make when we do this analysis, but it's at least an indication that it would be something that would benefit the business. And with a best case scenario, the client could make up to £54 million. So this client would hopefully opt to add this product to their portfolio, because this would be something that would possibly make them win money and still be perceived as a sustainable business. And then fourth, which also has to do with increasing our profit or investments, it's if we analyze, if we manage, and then we report on our climate risks and opportunities, we are able to tell our investors, we're able to tell our leadership that we know what's going to happen, that we know what we face, and that we're doing something about it. And also especially, it can help build a business build a business case to implement mitigation actions, to implement adaptation actions, because we can tell our board, we can tell our investors that if we don't act, then we're set to lose this much money, or we're set to win this much money if we're able to add new products to our portfolio. And here, this is just an example of how much finance has increased for sustainable businesses and how much it's expected to increase. But then also we know customers might also be interested in knowing what we're doing for climate change and how we are analyzing our risks and how we're acting on them. And then, of course, we have more and more employees who are drawn to sustainable companies. So it might be that we're also able to draw more people into our business that are concerned with it, and that will help us continue building a sustainable business. And here we have quite an interesting case of a client who performed a risk assessment report and then showed this risk assessment report to their insurance company. And their insurance company actually reduced their fees because they understood that, the client was, doing this science-based analysis, that they knew what they were facing, and then they were also acting on the different hazards in the different locations. So now into how to get started or progress on your climate risk and opportunity analysis. We know that this is not something that's super easy. We've talked about the challenges. It's costly, of course, but if we break it down into little steps, and here we'll simplify a little bit, but of course there's more to be said on each step, then we could at least get an idea of how we can get started or how we can progress. So first thing would be to understand where your risk hotspots lie. As you saw on the slide showing all the different types of risks and opportunities, there's a vast possibility of all the things that could affect us, right? But if we start by looking at the whole picture, making a long list of all the different risks and opportunities that we could face, given our business, given our locations, then we might be able to identify hotspots or places where our strategy is really vulnerable to these risks. This is an example of a tool that we use at South Pole to analyze the physical risks of clients, so they can map their locations in the map, and then we can see, where do the different hotspots are, depending on the hazard and depending on the geographical location. And once you've understood your hotspots, you want to quantify, you want to put a number to these risks, to the main risks that you have. And I mean, I've talked about this already, but the reason why you would want to put a number to it would be to compare it against your own materiality scales internally, so that you're able to know whether, can you accept the risk? Do you need to act on the risk? Do you need to mitigate the risk? Can you build a business case to develop a wide adaptation policy, a wide mitigation policy, etc.? This is an example of a carbon pricing assessment, where again we use the best case scenario, worst case scenario, and then we compare it against the client's EBITDA, and here, the client can say, okay, this risk, even in the worst case, it's slight, and they might choose not to act on it, but it might be that, they want to make it even less dangerous for them, so they might choose to act on it anyways. And finally, you want to integrate your climate risks and opportunities into your overall risk management processes within your company. So you want to really set a governance structure that would follow up with the adaptation mitigation measures that you take with each risk. Maybe figure out, am I already doing some initiatives that might help me continue with this mitigation or adaptation pathway? Can I set specific responsible people for this? Can I set targets? Can I set metrics? Can I follow up? And then, of course, this would help you argue towards report on your progress in terms of mitigation. So the bottom line with analyzing your climate risks and opportunities is that you might reduce your costs through mitigation, but then you might also increase your revenue sources through finding new opportunities in the net zero transition. So my main message is that understanding your climate risks and opportunities can help you build a case for a more resilient business, which is able to withstand not only the impacts of climate change or the challenges of a changing world, but also can help you profit from a net zero transition. Thank you.